welcome to the Intuitively Wild podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Levine. Living intuitively wild is about coming back home to ourselves. Here we talk about how to live connected to ourselves, others, and nature, and make a commitment to radical authenticity, vulnerability, and acceptance. On this podcast, we delve into a wide range of topics that span the human experience. We peel back the layers and talk about the things that are often not talked about. This is a space for us all to walk and wander this path of life together. Let's dig into our roots and go deep. Hello, welcome back to the podcast. I am truly so excited about today's episode. We are joined by Megan Doyle, who is a wanderlusting wellness lover whose intuition guided her to leaving the predictable path 3 years ago and live abroad. She recently retired from her 21-year corporate career and is pursuing her passion of helping others heal themselves. Her intuition currently has her living in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and has truly changed her life completely in the last few years. We talk about traveling and living abroad, letting go of loneliness and being by yourself, traveling solo. We talk about trusting our joy, the difference between easy and easeful, leaving space for the unexpected, and so many things in between. Thank you guys so much for being here, and let's jump into the episode. Megan, welcome to the podcast. I want to start with one of my favorite topics, which is traveling and living abroad, because I don't know if you know that I've lived abroad a bunch. And it's really shaped my life, and I'm so passionate about it. So you are currently living in Buenos Aires.
See,
I would love to hear how that, and you're from Pittsburgh. So I'd love to hear how that transpired, what was in between, and how you ended up there.
Oh my goodness, Rachel. Okay, how much time do we have? First, became interested in living abroad in about 2012. I had started traveling and just had some friends living abroad, and the appeal to be exposed to cultures, be exposed to something different than what was in the United States was just very attractive to me. For what I have come to realize is my attraction to growth, development, my curiosity in life, and being exposed to cultures, being exposed to different people. I mean, I do think that's one of the reasons that I lived for 15 years in New York City. While I am from Pittsburgh, I moved to New York right after college and lived there in total for 15 years. And I lived in Chicago for 4 as well. And both are very diverse places in the United States. So, you get some exposure, but that's all to say, I just was drawn to culture, different ways of living, different ways of experiencing life. And ultimately, though, it never came together for me. I kept trying different ways of finding jobs, of putting what my professional life was at that time, which was in the finance and insurance world, into something that I could do living in Europe, and was never able to make it happen. And in February of 2019, I took a last minute trip to Costa Rica. I was in one of my crazy burnout cycles in my corporate job and needed a getaway. And when I got to Costa Rica, I was in this tiny beach town that now is very well known by the name of Nosara. So it wasn't known to me at the time. It was a recommendation, and I get there and it's a tiny dirt town or dirt road town. And my body, though, instantly relaxed and instantly had this calm and this sensation that I actually, frankly, don't ever remember experiencing in my entire life. And by the end of the trip, I realized I need to live here. Forget Europe. I need to live here. I need to figure out. So as I went home on the airplane, I wrote out a plan of how either I was going to take my job, my corporate job, remote, or I was going to ultimately find a way to just leave my job and go work at a juice bar or a yoga studio in Nosara. Back in New York, a week later, COVID hits. And as everyone knows, that changed basically the trajectory of everyone's life in the world, including mine, which while, my heart and I was going through some different things at work, my boss was on a ventilator for 42 days. And my world just was a complete and utter whirlwind. But for me, it ended up opening up the door, an opportunity for me to leave New York. So I was able to unwind my life from New York while continuing to do my job and set in motion selling, purging, donating everything that I had for the most part, and leaving at the end of May to go back to Pittsburgh until the borders reopened. So I moved back in with my mom and her fiance for several months, because combination of I had nothing keeping me in New York, and my family, during COVID was like, well, why would you be alone? And it made a lot of sense. That's all to say, I sat around enjoying time with family, but waiting for the borders to reopen. And when Costa Rica finally opened their borders to Pennsylvania in October, I was on as early of a flight as I could possibly get. And that was the official start of my living abroad. So now I've just surpassed 3 years. It became at first, I was doing my corporate job remote, keeping the same hours as I worked in New York, and phoning in, because at the time we didn't have to be in the office. So I just did everything as I was doing it, as if I was sitting in my apartment in Brooklyn or my home in Pittsburgh, and on calls on Zoom and everything that I needed to do, but just from my apartment in Costa Rica. And so from there, it just became well, this is the vision, this is the dream. I'm going to continue to figure out how to make this work. And since there was never a mandate when I was in my corporate job to be in the office, I continued to just work and balance living abroad. I started learning Spanish, although I didn't really use it much while living in Costa Rica, because the town I was in was primarily American expats. So last year, while I was living in Costa Rica, in a lot of ways, I had a very dreamy, idealistic life. I rolled out of bed in the morning, walked down to the beach, sat and meditated in my favorite spot. Sometimes as the sun was coming up, or the sun might have already been up, watched the first surfers going in and out of the water, and had my moments and enjoyed my coffee, wrote, and just had a very slow, easy start to my day. And as much as I loved it, and as much as I loved the slow leisure pace of life and being in bed most nights before 10 o'clock or sometimes 9 p.m., I started getting little nudges that it was time to shake things up. I had done a lot of healing, a lot of growth, a lot of internal work during up until that point, the past year and a half. And while I adored the variance from New York City to being in this quiet little sleepy beach town, I was being drawn to being back in an urban environment, back in a city, back with the ability to walk to, any number of stores, restaurants, variety. And I thought, this is also, I had been wanting to do some traveling, and as the world was normalizing as well, and it was safe to be in different countries, it was safe to travel, I thought, okay, this is perfect. I've always wanted to travel throughout South America. But I had spent some time, I had gone to Mexico twice, and that was also very appealing to me. So I started off actually at the end of 2022, going to Mexico City and living there for 2 months. And not sure if you've spent any time there. It's a fabulous city, highly recommend, but it's also a highly, it's a lot of expats as well. And so while that is very appealing and it makes it comfortable in a lot of ways, and it was a great step after Costa Rica, while I was there, thought, okay, let's head south. Let's head to more diversity. Let's get something that has more culture. And in the mix of all of that, I had booked a ticket to Peru, a one-way ticket to Peru, and had planned to spend all of January there. Well, that got squashed, and it just didn't make sense to go. So I scratched that, basically threw a dart at the map and said, well, where haven't I been? Where do I want to go to? And Chile was the first thing that came to mind. And I managed to put together in less than a month's timing a 2-week trip, I'll figure it out from there. So I took my one-way flight, spent 2 weeks in Chile, and on the backside of it, though, I needed somewhere to go to. And Buenos Aires, I had been to Buenos Aires briefly in 2019 on my way to Uruguay. And there was just an appeal that started coming up. A lot of people were talking about it. It was only an hour flight from Santiago. And I thought, all right, let me go there, get my bearings. Well, once I got to Buenos Aires, my body instantly had that calm, that ease, that peace. That is my internal guidance. My connection with my intuition is how I view it, that says, this is where you're to spend some time. So fast forward from the 22nd of February of 2023 until now, I have spent most of the year here.
I had a similar experience in a lot of ways, because when I was in college, I studied abroad 3 times, and the third was to Hawaii. And we went to all the different islands. And when I got there, I was like, I need to move here. I don't know what I have to do. I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm moving to Hawaii. And when I graduated college, I moved to Kauai, and I just knew I had to be there, and I loved it so much. It was an amazing experience. I was there for a year, and after a year, I was like, it's time to go. And I knew it was time to go. And it was similar in the sense that the pace of life was really slow, and it was really relaxing and beautiful, but my body was just like, there's something more. I need something more. And that took me on a whole winding path that is not what this episode's about, but it's so interesting how our bodies really tell us. And if we're listening, they are giving us information. We have to be open to hearing it and accepting it. Because I think a lot of people might be able to acknowledge, oh, I feel at peace here, or I feel at home here. But they're like, but that's silly. I'm going home. Like, this is just a trip, or like, I could never move here. You said you had these little nudges. What did that look like? And what was the work you were doing at the time that allowed you to really trust yourself and trust that feeling in your body?
Great questions. Probably the more important and the better to start with is what I was doing in my life. And because ultimately that laid the foundation for me to be able to connect with myself. So I, for years dabbled in meditation. I had a very, very strong yoga practice. And, in the course of that, though, would meditate here and there, would do a little bit of breath work, but I intuitively became guided to sitting, to the breath work. And for me, and this is something that I still to this day think, that it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be this big production necessarily, as I think sometimes we get ourselves tripped into thinking that, oh, I have to sit in silence and stillness or listen to a recording for 10 minutes and check a meditation box. What I truly, and still to this day, though, find is that connection with nature definitively allows me to gain a lot of clarity, quiet, stillness, connection with my body, connection with my intuition. But that's all to say that I started, no matter where I was, spending the first couple of minutes in the morning in that quiet, in that still. When I went to the beach, though, when I was living in Nosara, it was for a longer period of time. And my practice, though, began incorporating the senses. And what did I smell? What did I hear? What could I feel? What could I taste? My coffee or my water. That experience started expanding into journaling as well. And I had what I call my morning moments, my morning mindful moments that I would commit to. And it became a cathartic exercise as well, that I would dump out what I was dreaming of, what I was visualizing for my life, what my gratitudes were, prayers, what my intentions were. And this became a ritual for me. And as I sat with and got clear around what I wanted in my life. Alongside, what I was doing on my own, I was working with a couple of different healing modalities, primarily Reiki and energetic body work that was helping me move a lot of stuck garbage. And finding space, finding clarity, finding a release, finding that connection also with myself that I had lost for all of the reasons. And as I went through that, and as I sat with the fact, also a big thing that happened for me organically, actually, was I started regulating my nervous system, because I realized that while I was living in this tropical paradise, my nervous system was still really jacked up. And I still was on edge. I still was going through a lot of dysregulation, a lot of emotional upheaval as well, a lot of anxiety, a lot of other erratic symptoms. And it became evident that something had to give, which ties into, I actually did make the decision to leave my corporate job, because that was where the dysregulation, whenever I narrowed it down, was coming from. But I dove into finding ways to really regulate my nervous system naturally and taking care of myself, taking care of my health through mindfulness, through these micro moments, through engaging the senses. And that ultimately allowed me to really hear as well, that I started having this, what I call like a little disruption inside, little tingling slash, not almost like a irritation, but a, hey, this isn't working anymore. We're ready for something new. We're ready for something more. And as I started listening, and that's when I went to Mexico City twice and went to other parts of Mexico, it started becoming more and more evident that my time in Costa Rica was coming to an end. And that I also think the work that I had done to heal my nervous system supported me being back in those environments, that I could be exposed to stimulus, that I could be around noise, I could be around a lot of people, because I had lived for so long in New York City and had been in the high demands of the typical New York City world. And there were parts of me that loved it and actually didn't even realize how much I was so thrown off until I got to the jungle, and until, you're living in dead silence, except for the animals and the little insects at night that you hear, that, your body was holding on to that. And that's all to say, I finally realized that I'd done the work to counteract and balance and learn how to navigate through all of that. It was time to step out. And the sorrow would always be there, and that's the other thing too, is that it was time to explore other parts of the world.
I am from New York. I grew up in New York, and I grew up a little bit outside of the city, but whenever I went into the city often, and whenever I did, I was always so drained and so overwhelmed and so dysregulated. Now that I have done the work to learn how to regulate my nervous system and have these mindfulness practices, I'm able to go into New York, into the city, and into other overstimulating environments. And I'm simultaneously extra aware that things are happening to dysregulate me, and I'm able to regulate myself. So I have a simultaneously more overwhelming experience and grounded experience. And I think that so many people live their lives not realizing that they're dysregulated, and not realizing that that dysregulation is controlling their decisions and overriding their intuition. And it seems like you were able to start making the distinction between intuition and dysregulation or fear or any other word you can put in there. How did that unraveling happen for you?
It's interesting because, especially with spending more and more time abroad and observing and getting to know different cultures, and the culture in the United States being so forced and focused for the most part on work, on go, 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 on fill your plate, spin as many plates, even as well, as much as you possibly can. And, that was something that I fed into and drank that Kool-Aid and subscribed to for 20 some years. And by no fault other than that was what I was surrounded by and thought was the way to go. What started just becoming of interest and following what I like to call, whether some people call them breadcrumbs, some people, what I like also to call them is the twinkles or the sparkles, the little things that excite you and light you up. And they might not have a reason or a logic to them, but there's something about it that, gives you that little sparkle and that little lightness. And what I started finding was that gravitating towards the lightness in whatever capacity, that became the draw and the appeal. And through that, I was able to hear myself more. And while, I think social media and people out there are brilliant resources to expose us to these ideas. And I do think that there are a lot of people who guide and or offer suggestions. It truly, for me, just came from getting quiet in different capacities, whether it was on a walk and not having music in, whether, as I mentioned, the morning. Writing has become very cathartic for me and opened up a lot of channels, paths, clarity, the excitement and that adrenaline. And that, in New York, there was a constant state of being on and a constant state of doing. And when I started just being and not necessarily having to have my phone in my hand at all times or going the internet, Instagram, even Googling stuff, I started finding a peace within that also allowed the clarity to start coming through, that allowed my body to feel actually relaxed, to allow me not to feel like jittery, that anxiousness that you're waiting for something to happen, or that anxiousness that you didn't get everything done and you have to work till 11 o'clock to get everything done and it's still not going to be good enough, or that your boss is never going to be happy, or that, how are you going to do everything that you want to possibly do for XYZ reason? And your body and your mind are in this state of just attentiveness and hyper overdrive, that it's like this weight as well as what I've also equated it to. And when I gave myself the permission to give space to my life, especially on the weekends, I would just leave my phone at home and I would go out for the day. It also helped that Nosara doesn't have great Wi-Fi throughout the town. So unless you go to a restaurant or a store, you don't have Wi-Fi. So it became like a natural part of my life that I actually disconnected, but reconnected with myself. And I've carried that through, as when I'm back in the States, I also try to not always be on my phone / give periods of time without it. Now in Buenos Aires, while I have my phone, I am not on it all the time. I try to be sure, I am as present also as I can possibly be in my environments. And that for me also, the mindfulness and, I mentioned before, sensory engagement became also a way for me to regulate my nervous system, to shift also out of being in my head and into my body, and noticing and appreciating and enjoying life in a different way than I ever had before.
I've experienced it. I've lived that story as well. And I really think that your theme, you focused on simplifying it and coming back to the quiet and the stillness. That's everything. I think we overcomplicate spirituality. We overcomplicate life. And it's because we don't have the contrast between the two experiences. Most people have only lived in that doing state, that overstimulating state, and they don't give themselves the permission to disconnect from that. Those who do have that opportunity and do give themselves permission are able to take a new perspective and be like, oh, wow, there is something off balance. Yep. Once you have a time where you're in that space, that disconnection, you really feel the difference. What has been the scariest part about this change for you? Because you've really completely changed your life in the last few years. What has that brought up for you? What has been the hardest thing to overcome?
When you, as I like to say, when you sign up for the growth, when you sign up for the healing, when you sign up for the self-work, it's not a one and done. It only becomes a trajectory that continues to unfold, and it's beautiful and it's all the things. And I have come to learn that my mantra is trust and surrender. And when you think you've trusted and surrendered enough, let go and trust and surrender some more, while being open and curious, looking at life through the lens of, we are here for a short period of time, and whatever that looks like, whatever that's going to be, my curiosity, my internal whole drive have me on this path that who I am today is only going to continue to evolve. And I don't know what that is going to look like. Of course, there are things that I envision. There are things that come to me. There are things that I dream of. There are things that I quote unquote want, which perhaps that has been probably the biggest realization for me, is that we can want and get what we want in life. But oftentimes it's what we either need that makes more of the difference when it comes down to it. So I've learned to let go of the control around what I want, at least in the chapter that I'm in, and trusting that what I need is going to be presented to me. Now, those opportunities for the growth, for the lessons, for the work, for the expansion, for the healing, they also don't necessarily always look like we think they're going to look and go how we think they're going to go. They oftentimes can smack us around and make us question a lot more than we ever expected. However, I come back to, whenever I trust, I surrender, I let go, especially of the need to control. I'm able to hear, I'm able to be with myself. I'm able to trust myself to get through the situations, no matter what they are, even if they're bumpy, even if they're messy, even if there's crap ton of emotions coming up, which oftentimes there are, and to let the emotions work through me for however long they need to, and trusting that there will be the light again, there will be the stability and the magic.
Only way that I have been able to embrace change is by knowing that I have my own back, and that knowing that no matter what, I can get through it and I will be okay. I've been talking about change a lot recently with so many different people. The fact of the matter is that change is inevitable, and we can't plan life. And life happens in the unexpected moments. And if we trust that we will get through it no matter what, and if we surrender to the unexpected and let it be even more magical than we could even think about, that we could even imagine, it unfolds with what we need. So we just have to kind of let it happen.
Yes. I mean, so much easier said than done, but beautifully said, as you said, but that's the edge, right? Connecting with ourselves, trusting ourselves first and foremost. It's really hard to do sometimes, or we're not necessarily raised always to trust ourselves, and our society doesn't necessarily support us in trusting ourselves as a foundation.
Our society tells us to trust the path, that's laid out for everyone, and to intellectualize and think logically through everything, and to let that be our guide, when really that is not our intuition, that is not what leads us down our unique path, and that is what disconnects us from ourselves.
Yep.
Especially, I mean, both of us, drawing on your human design, both of us are emotional authorities. So it's not about what our mind is logically telling us, it's about what our emotions are telling us consistently over time. And we have to reprogram ourselves to work in that way, because from a very young age, society is telling us, shut down your emotions, stop being so emotional, and just do what you're supposed to do. And that brings me to another question of, what are you working on strengthening your intuition around? Because it sounds like you have done a lot of work reconnecting to yourself and to that inner voice within, but what part of your life do you still not trust yourself fully?
Romantically. Admittedly, I had thought that I had healed. I thought that I was on a, new trajectory and taking care of some of those wounds, some of the childhood stuff, if you will. But I was presented with several situations this year, thanks to one individual, that beautifully shone a light on where I need some additional TLC. It's funny in some ways, because this comes back to the whole what I want versus what I got and what I needed. And that I do truly believe that relationships, particularly romantic, do oftentimes shed a light on where we have space for growth, where we have space for expansion, where we have space for connecting with ourselves and being truly ourselves. I was approaching so many things with a closed heart, out of fear, out of assumption of repeat patterns, out of an assumption of being hurt. And what I came to realize was that everyone's different, and every engagement, every connection is different. And if you lead with love, and you lead with authenticity, and you lead with kindness, the outcome's going to be better, even if there's hurt involved, even if it still, quote unquote, doesn't go the way that you think it's supposed to go. But, you can realize that maybe it wasn't supposed to be forever, it wasn't supposed to be for a long time, or whatever the case might be. But there was an interesting lesson that I did learn this year that gave me so much more peace than I ever expected from something not working out. But that's all to say that I do want to be in a healthy romantic partnership with a man who shares the same values, commitments, objectives, intentions in life. And I want to be able to present myself for that. Whether it's, and I don't necessarily know that I don't think there's a thing as being fully healed and getting into a relationship, because something else is just going to come up. So, but that's all to say, that is a big area of my life that I would love to have my intuition guiding me with, in terms of who is, and that's the thing, because it's not necessarily a safe, I think this is where I probably need a journal around this and flush this out a little bit more. But trusting myself also, that I show up fully from day one. That to me is probably the component of following my intuition within relationships. That would be the biggest one. And then, some personal endeavors. I am pivoting into some different endeavors and figuring out how best to enjoy what I'm actually doing. I worked in the corporate world for 21 years, and oftentimes, I did the job just to do the job and pounded the pavement. I really want to be doing something that I am passionate about, that I'm helping people, that I am working in a sense that it's not just to collect a paycheck, that it makes an impact. So I'm taking some time to figure that out and flush that out in ways that it feels more so than just being a quote unquote title.
So it sounds like in a lot of ways, you're learning to trust what feels good and to trust what brings you joy and what flows. I agree that often our most intimate relationships are mirrors that show us what we need to work on, and the work is never ending. But again, it comes back to if we can show up in full alignment and integrity with ourselves, we know that we will get through those moments and we will show up the best we can, and we will learn what we need to learn. And if something doesn't work out, it's not for us to close down that trust with ourselves. It's to say, I learned something here. Like, this was the relationship where I learned this, and now I know that moving forward. But I really feel like for you, it's trusting the ease. It's trusting what feels good.
Yes, for sure. I think especially after spending so much of my life in a force and a control and a go, being on that path, on that trajectory that also was laid out for me and by, the society that I used to live in. So I guess the other thing too is, following whether or not and how long I stay in Buenos Aires. And if there's other cities meant for me to live in and follow, but I trust that I will hear and know when that happens. There's environmental factors that sometimes do come up that I sit and say, okay, is that a sign that I'm supposed to go? Are things not working in my favor that I'm supposed to go? Or, these snafus and different life things that come up that throw a wrench into life, not necessarily being easeful here. Because I also think that there is a misnomer around the fact of living out your dreams abroad is always going to be easeful. In fact, I actually think it can be a hell of a lot harder and at times stressful than, living in the States. But the backside of that, or the upside, is that the reward and the experience and the bliss and all of the things that are magical are only possible as a result of it. And, that's all to say that the external, I'm learning to separate and say, no, I'm not going to necessarily attach to the logic of my Taylor Swift concert tickets were a fraud. I didn't get to go last night. The little other things that sometimes happen, and I'm learning Spanish, and communication is not always easy. But when I sit with myself, when I go to the parks, when I'm listening and slowing down, I still have a F yes, this is where we're supposed to be. But, that could change.
People can get confused between thinking things need to be easy to be in flow and to be easeful. But I think there's a difference between easy and easeful. Like,
absolutely.
Easeful means that it feels right in my body. It brings me good emotions. Like, it just feels aligned. And easy, like, I didn't do anything. Like, it just happened.
Right. Yep. Yes.
Often our biggest dreams and our most rewarding moments are not easy, but they're easeful because they bring us that sense of peace. What is something that you wish people talked about more, or that you wish you were able to talk more about?
In the spirit of living abroad and following those dreams, that a lot of people hold back for the fear of the unknown. And say they wish they could, or they want to, but they never do. They never take the steps, or they never let themselves even fully dream to figure out how it could be possible. That's to say that living in that safe space of not pursuing for fear of the unknown is a detriment to, I think, our overall well-being. And it limits both our growth, because I actually don't think my growth and my evolution as a human being would have happened and or would have happened in the short period of time that it did if I hadn't left the US 3 years ago. That's not to say that you can't experience growth living in the United States. That's not to say that you can't experience growth living in your hometown. It just will look very different. And to me, the willingness to step outside of those comfort zones, to take the risks, even though they're going to be effing unknowns. And I don't always like the word scary, or fearful, but what you don't know, uncomfortable. Uncomfortable is the perfect word. The discomfort that does come with living abroad is never ending. But I think the question that we have to ask ourselves is, am I willing to stay comfortable out of fear and out of what is told to me or what I believe to be the only way, as a trade-off for living out a life that exceeds my dreams, that has the potential for experiences, connections, opportunities, personal growth. I mean, I feel like for me, that aspect, it's not even something that can be put on paper or like exactly mapped out, because it just happens, because you're forced, when you're out of your comfort zone, to expand, to evolve, or you go back to what you were doing before, and there's nothing wrong with that. But for most people who say, I'm going to sign up for the life abroad, you have that internal drive, you have that curiosity like you had, and you still do, but it served as a foundation to carry you through these experiences.
I am a huge advocate of solo traveling. I think that it is so important. I think that it's how I've grown like some of my most growth-giving moments, and self-discovery has come from there, and experiences and learning about different cultures and different perspectives, seeing the world in a whole new way. I wish everyone would travel and have those experiences, but it's not maybe meant for everyone. But I do think that to live a fully aligned life, you have to get out of your comfort zone, to be uncomfortable and to be seen differently, to do something different. And not everyone is willing to do that in this lifetime. And I think that's fine. Like, everyone's path is different, but I do think in order to live fully aligned to ourselves, it comes with pushing our comfort zones.
Yes, I absolutely couldn't agree more. And being okay with traveling solo or doing things solo. I've had to also work really hard to shed my limiting beliefs around. And every now and then little things pop up that here I am, at 44, doing things solo, living solo, making these moves internationally solo. But when I connect with myself, when I trust myself and I get into that space of being at ease and peace, I embrace my courage. I embrace the fact that I'm living out my dreams, that I am pursuing things that do light me up, that do make me happy. And that sometimes, is scary to be doing these things alone. But on the flip side of it, the alternative isn't appealing to me and doesn't light me up. And, I think that's one of the biggest things that I try to not push on people, but encourage, if anybody ever, especially the younger generations, but even as you get older, at any chapter you're able to do this. Don't hold yourself back out of a fear of going at it solo, or a fear of, what are people going to think, or what is this going to look like? And I think that's another beautiful thing, that especially in cities, it is very easy to be solo. And that is something that I did realize, I think was an intuitive pull to being back in a large city, was finding community again, because it wasn't happening for me in Costa Rica. And so, now there's an abundance of options, which is really beautiful.
I have spent most of my life up until this point doing things by myself, traveling by myself. I've done everything by myself pretty much. And that has allowed me to now know myself on a deeper level and be more comfortable with myself. And I do think that people are so afraid of being with themselves and by themselves. They settle for relationships or situations that are not right for them because they're so afraid of being by themselves for so many different reasons. And I think if people are even able to take a day to be by themselves, or an hour to sit with themselves, it can really change your life.
Yes, I full on agree. And I mean, I think that there are a lot of people who do meet their soulmates and or their partners and mates early in life, but I do find, like, from talking to people and from experience in different ways, like having some time that isn't occupied. And I understand for parents, that's a stretch, but being able to hear your own voice inside and your intuition, it only comes with those moments of silence, of stillness. And again, I don't necessarily think this has to mean sitting on a meditation pillow. I think this could be taking a walk without music or without, your phone. It could look like cooking in the kitchen and being mindful of whatever you're preparing. There are a lot of different ways that this, I think, can happen for us that we just also have to be open to. We had like coming back to, I shared earlier, listening to those little sparkles, those little things that light us up, that might not make sense, but they give us a peace and an ease.
I do think for some people, it starts with just being open to it, with even claiming,
Yes.
I'm open to the unknown. I'm open to connecting to my intuition more. Just stating that intention can help it all unfold. It might lead to a book or a class or a journey. You never know. But stating the intention can, if you don't know where to start, that can be a good place. What is something that you used to feel shame about and that you've now learned to love or accept about yourself?
I would say probably, like, dovetailing on what I was mentioning before, being single in my 40s, not having children at this point, and doing all these things solo. I was traveling solo for a number of years before making the move abroad. And it tends to be one of the first questions, especially also here in Argentina, that comes up is, oh, you're solo, you're single, where's your husband? But finding peace, finding ease with the fact that for reasons that I can't waste headspace on anymore. I spent a lot of time when I lived in New York wondering why relationships weren't working or why I wasn't meeting the right guy and what was I doing wrong and all of the things. And just recognizing that also, I'm optimistic. I'll still meet him at some point. But until then, I'm going to live my life and enjoy my life and do the things that light me up and go on vacations. I've done 2 solo trips recently here. And, the irony is, a friend pointed out to me that when you do travel solo, you can do and spend the time where you want to and not have to worry about somebody else. So I could spend 3 hours at the bird park and not have to be concerned that somebody else wanted to go or was annoyed that I was taking so many pictures or that I wanted to stare and, look up whatever bird I was looking at in the moment, because I've become obsessed with birds. And they light me up and they make me happy and all of the things, but that I could just have that peace for myself, and know that in time. But I do believe and I trust that listening and connecting with myself is also going to make me a better partner for whomever he is whenever he comes along. And being secure in navigating how I go about my life and where I'm at and what I do. And, there's times when it's frustrating because, you have to do everything yourself. But then there's times when I'm also, I found the security with recognizing I haven't settled and I'm not in a subpar, unhealthy, unfulfilling relationship. Like there are a lot of people out there in the world. And I can continue to live my life. I can also, right now, selfishly spend my time how I want to, which means I can come back to the United States and devote my time and energy to my niece and nephew and my family. And then I can come back here. And I don't have to ask or I don't have to worry about another person. Granted, at some point I do, want to be involved with somebody else in their family, but like I can be selfish with my time and my energy.
The more we accept and grow in the space of being by ourselves, the more clear we get on who we are and what we want, and have the ability to say, I would rather be by myself and accept my own path than settle and
absolutely
and be with someone or do something that is not really meant for me. I think
yep.
that only comes with that space by ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I would add is this year, I have finally found a peace with the concept of loneliness, and it's left my vocabulary for, I would say, 99% of the time. But I lived when I was in New York and in Costa Rica feeling lonely, even though I was surrounded by people. And I always attribute it to not being in a partnership. And this year, by virtue of, I truly think connecting with myself, listening to myself, trusting myself, that has dissipated. And I don't feel that way. And again, this isn't like a magic potion or a prescribed, say this mantra and you release you're feeling lonely. This is just, to me, a evolution, but also that being comfortable in obviously discomfort, but also being comfortable with myself and living life and enjoying life.
Yes. Coming back to the simplicity of the present moment. This is what's happening in the present. Yeah. I'm accepting it and I'm embracing it and I'm surrendering to it.
And that is the thing that we do get for sure when we are by ourselves. We can indulge, like I like to make an indulgent experience out of almost everything I do whenever I'm solo. But whether it be making my cup of coffee, whether it be taking a bath, whether, the food, and trying to really limit the distractions to totally taste. Because I do notice when I'm with people, I'm not always as focused. But when I'm by myself, everything can turn into a luxurious experience that just takes the simplicity of life into this beautiful other endeavor.
So living intuitively wild means living dedicated to your true, authentic self, no matter what. How do you feel like you live intuitively wild?
Living abroad. And immersing myself as much as I possibly can, which right now that looks like taking Spanish lessons and really learning to speak Spanish with meeting a diverse variety of people, learning more about the local culture. Because I can't explain what my draw is to learning the language, to being here, other than it lights me up, other than it gives me that easeful peace, that serenity, but also the energetic little tingly buzz. That's a positive little tingly buzz that to me is part of what living really is. And, my wish for people is that they can find that space to hear, to connect, to feel that ease, that peace. And also, that goes hand in hand with nervous system regulation, but very, very much so. Being able to be aligned.
Yes to all of it. And it's really cool to look at your human design chart, because you do have a lot of centers open, specifically your identity center. I don't know how familiar you are with human design, but you really take on the energy of the environment you're with and are really impacted by it. And so it makes so much sense that it gives you, when you're in different environments, they give you these different tingly feelings that make you feel alive or overwhelmed or whatever it is. Thank you so, so much. I think that,
oh my gosh,
such a diverse conversation about so many things that I'm passionate about and really connect with you on. So I'm really grateful you took the time. Thank you.
Well, I'm grateful and honored that you had me, Rachel. This was a delight.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Intuitively Wild, the podcast. I hope it helped deepen your connection to yourself, sparked some insights, and inspired you to live intuitively wild. If you enjoyed this podcast, it would mean so much to me if you would share it with others and leave a rating and review. And please reach out to me. I would love to connect with you. I will see you next time for more magic.